Why is Doctor Who still here? When did this show reach the point where there was no going back? You could point to the War Games, the first Dalek story, Deadly Assassin, but if there's a serial we owe an unparalleled amount of debt to, it's gotta be my favourite classic Who serial. A piece of sci-fi that's so devoid of precedent, I don't know what the hell kids back in the 60s must have been thinking. Now, I need to make something clear up front. This is a video about Power of the Daleks. I chose Power of the Daleks for One Diamond Story. But I truly believe that part of what makes this story effective is the context of the preceding 4 episodes. I can't analyse Power of the Daleks without first discussing the 10th planet in at least some detail. Just bear with me on this, I promise it will all make sense. Anyone who follows me on Twitter knows my feelings over the Cybermen. They've got the weakest track record of all the Doctor Who rogues gallery. There are plenty of good stories that happen to have Cybermen in them, but in terms of what you can actually do with them, well, they can either be placeholder Daleks, this is what most of the 60s and the 80s do. What works a bit better is casting them as a historical process. This is what Spare Parts or World Enough and Time do. Cybermen aren't so much antagonists there as they are something that can happen to you in your world. But then you have the 10th planet, which treats them like actual characters. This isn't the same as a Shard, that's more the Dalek lone survivor treatment. These Cybermen feel more like a collection of individuals than an invading army. From the way they're shot, to the fact they even have names. They all but drop out the story in part 3, which allows us to see the contrast between them and the humans. Cutler becomes the main antagonist for a while, willing to risk half the Earth with the Z-bomb just for a chance to save his son. Note how these Cybermen don't have a leader, there's no controller or master, because they don't need them. There's no infighting. They're the perfect beings. No emotions means no nepotism. These Cybermen are beyond good and evil. TARDIS Eruditorum discusses this in great detail, talking about the Cybermen conversion as a sort of dark spiritual enlightenment. The story is actually on their side.
Well, there is really no point. They could never reach Earth now.
But don't you care?
Care? No, why should I care?
Because they're people and they're going to die.
I do not understand you. There are people dying all over your world, yet you do not care about them.
The fact they phrase their plan like it's something they're doing for humanity, going about it in a polite, even business-like manner, makes them almost Faustian.
I will require your name,
energy.
and
How long? Miss John Dyson, supervising engineer.
until it is all gone. Age, stop, age.
But you can't.
please.
And how are you going to
Name and
stop this drain of energy
occupation,
demand?
please. Age, that's your age.
Mondas might as well be hell. In the end, it becomes a world of burning mass and fire. The Cybermen are demons, politely asking for our names and ages like they're filling in paperwork.
Molly, babe, come in and meet the Daleks.
It's interesting to wonder how the first regeneration might have sounded on paper. Honestly, if Doctor Who Twitter had existed back in the 60s, I bet a lot of us would have been whinging. You say it out loud without the context of all the regenerations we've had since, and it does kinda sound like wank. Part 1 is a restrained 25-minute block of television. Eerie, gloomy. It has a jump scare that somehow startled me on a first viewing. Our questions go ignored by the man standing in the place of our hero. Ben and Polly have to come up with the answers themselves. The Doctor's being vague, speaking in metaphors, or just agreeing with whatever was said last. Apparently this process has something to do with the TARDIS.
Part of the TARDIS. Without it, I couldn't survive.
Which is a detail and a suggestion I really like. Does the TARDIS grant the Doctor immortality? Was this strange old man once like his companions? A mortal who came across a wonderful, impossible magic box. Only the difference between him and his friends is that he never left. Now we know this isn't the case anymore, but I think there's the germ of this idea in the TARDIS playing a role in Jack and River getting long lifespans. Through a lot of these 6 episodes, the new Doctor barely seems to even notice Ben and Polly. Most of the conversations 2 has in this story are with himself. Literally, he talks about the Doctor like he's a different person. He's constantly making leaps and getting fixated on stuff that no other character is keeping track of. 2 lets Quinn get taken prisoner. He refuses to answer questions when Polly rightly points out that they could help him better if they knew what was going on. His companions can't count on him to look after them. He shows barely any concern when Polly's kidnapped. He suggests letting the guards get killed by the Daleks in order to buy them time. He causes untold havoc on the colony when he destroys the Daleks, and kinda looks giddy about it, harkening back to one's elation at causing the fire in Rome. The final note of this story is that he may have been making this whole thing up as he went along, and just accomplished what he did out of luck. The tension and implications that come with this new Doctor aren't resolved at the end of this story. What amazes me about this is that this situation should not work. This premise is so easy to mess up. You need the audience to accept the new lead to at least some extent, but if you demystify what's just happened, then the change feels cheap, it feels inorganic and unearned. So completely pulling back, being this restrained, and giving the audience this much trust is so clever. But at the same time, this is also a show playing it safe. We've got the Daleks on hand, the one constant of these last few years of the show. Them recognizing the Doctor means far more than Ben or Polly doing it. But not only is this a story where the Doctor isn't anything like his usual self, the Daleks aren't acting like Daleks. They're your servants now. They bring you refreshments. They obey. They're your friends. The audience isn't expected to buy this for even a second, but that just makes it even more tense. I really like Darren Mooney's point that the focus of this story really is in the title. Power of the Daleks is about the acquisition of power. Specifically, how fascism uses divide and conquer tactics to gain a foothold. What's interesting to note is that the rebels are being led by one of the antagonists, but the uprising itself isn't actually condemned by the story. Valmar, one of the rebels, is one of the few survivors at the end of this, and it seems like him and Quinn, the second in command, might be able to rebuild the colony into something better. Beyond the name drop of pressure groups, the story doesn't really go into too many specifics about what they actually wanted. Henschel's not depicted as a perfect leader, so it's likely the group had some legitimate grievance. The real point Power of the Daleks is making is with Bragan. He manipulates the uprising against the governor to improve his own standing, uses his guards to set up a police state, and then scapegoats his followers to create the illusion that he's restoring order. I think the most revealing aspect of this story is that Bragan starts wearing a black uniform.
The colony's become too small for him. He wants us out of the way now.
Yeah, well, it often happens that way, mate, when you follow blokes like him.
And while Bragan and Jane Lee use the Daleks are using them. They take advantage of the petty human squabbling to strike and reinstate their law, micro to macro. Hell, something that's worth noting, the Daleks only really hold back when they don't need to after this line.
Why do human beings kill human beings?
So there's an entirely valid reading that the Daleks have become better fascists because of their experience with humanity. That is impressively bleak.
Greed and ambition. That's all it is. Wait till they find out what their precious production figures have cost.
And can we just take a second to appreciate how big a leap this was for Daleks at the time? This is the first time we see one of them have a moment of reflection, of contemplation. It didn't need to ask Bragan this question. It wasn't part of its cover. It was genuinely curious. This is a big reason why I needed to discuss the 10th planet at the start. This line echoes the Cybermen's confusion at emotions, pain, and why humans would want to try and save astronauts who are already doomed. The Daleks are presented as beyond good and evil. Would it be a reach to say there's something Lovecraftian to them here? Does that even go beyond resemblance to well-known cosmic horror tropes? Obviously, there's the tentacled and sea creature-like appearance of the Daleks in their true form. Lesterson talks about them replacing us, and it's the knowledge of them reproducing, not just the sight of them in their true form, that drives him insane. Which, yeah, that was certainly one of Howard's hang-ups. When the protagonist of Shadow over Innsmouth, yes, this is the most basic bitch Lovecraft story to pick, but go with me here. When he realizes the truth, he thus describes his feelings. The tense extremes of horror are lessening, and I feel queerly drawn toward the unknown sea deeps instead of fearing them. I hear and do strange things in sleep, and awake with a kind of exultation instead of terror. This resembles Lesterson at least a little bit. He breaks down at first in part 5, panicking and trying desperately to stop the Daleks, but by episode 6, he's reached a horrifying acceptance of his place in the universe.
Marvelous creatures. You have to admire them. They're the new species, you see, taking over from Homo sapiens. Man's had his day. Finished now.
That's why I want to touch on the animation a little bit. If anyone's got any criticisms of it, it's usually in the appearance of the human characters, especially the 2016 version.
We're not talking about Dalek stories, we're talking about Troughton stories. And Troughton looks like he's made out of pancakes, which is ridiculous to do to my boy Troughton.
Whereas most of the praise for this story is usually in how the Daleks are animated. Now, this is an absolute reach, completely obviously unintended, but I think the limitations with the format inadvertently make the story's point. Even when Jane Lee realizes they're in danger, she takes a second to marvel at the Daleks. They're prettier than us. The perfect killing machines. Now, portraying the Daleks as both the insidiousness of fascism and as arguably morally superior to us does clash a bit, but as I said, it follows up from the themes of the previous Cyberman story, and it's a nice evolution from the update in the Daleks' master plan to reflect Cold War concerns. And the Daleks' lack of infighting gets recontextualized later in this season in Evil of the Daleks as fascist conformity, upholding an evil dying empire. So, I'm okay with this in isolation. Besides, the questioning over how much true moral superiority we have over Daleks is something we see later down the line in stories like Jubilee, in particular its adaptation Dalek.
Do you know what a Dalek is, Van Stan? A Dalek is honest. It does what it was born to do for the survival of its species. That creature in your dungeon is better than you.
In that case, I will be true to myself and continue.
Yeah, Power of the Daleks has an insane amount of reach. Shearman, Gatiss, Chibnall. We've all been copying this story's homework ever since.
All we can do is marvel at the creatures who are taking our place.
This could apply to the Cybermen, and the most chilling thing of all is that it could also apply to the Doctor. Through the Cybermen and then the Daleks, we're presented with two versions of the show being replaced. Option 1, the Cybermen represents Doctor Who turning into a different show, going into strange, uncharted territory with a lead who has never seemed less like us, with no turning back. Option 2 is the Daleks. As usual, they represent extermination, death, narrative collapse. The show could just be cancelled and replaced with something else. Something new will come along to fill the BBC's time slot, and maybe Terry Nation can go and make his Dalek spin-off in America. This story's not above meta-commentary. About Time notes the importance of the Doctor pretending to be an examiner here. Through the Cybermen and the Daleks, it reads like the show spending weeks grappling with the change in its leading man, on an ideological level. Hartnell was the one remaining element of this show, created by Verity Lambert, Sidney Newman, Waris Hussein, David Whittaker, and some other people. Troughton in the Par was undoubtedly a shot in the arm. He was the template for so many actors who came after him, and I would give anything to have these episodes back just so I can see more of his deft, uncanny performance. But it's hard to escape the image of Doctor Who as a self-effacing ship of Theseus, cautiously replacing the last plank, whilst wondering if this is the right call. It's the classic preservation or evolution conundrum, something this franchise will contend with over and over and over again, until one day it finally decides enough is enough. Or it goes and makes a deal with Disney.